Good afternoon. I'm Hartwig Fischer, Director of the British Museum. We are doing a series on objects from the collection of the British Museum that, in this moment of a global health crisis, speak of crises in the past and of how people have adapted to them, how they have come on top of them, how they have tackled them to prevail, or in some cases, to falter. And today, I'm to Jonathan Tubb, keeper of the Middle East Department since 2009 at the British Museum, and before that, curator of the ancient Levant at the British Museum. Jonathan, it's wonderful to see you today and to talk about an object that you have chosen. And I'm very curious to learn which object it is you have chosen.
Well, the object that I've chosen, it looks very modest, and it's just a little oil lamp, a very mundane oil lamp, but it's one that tells a huge story, because when you look at it, you notice that it's got 4 spouts. Most oil lamps, most oil lamps got 1 spout. This has 4. And it comes from a period at the end of the 3rd millennium BC, when there was a major crisis which affected both Egypt and the southern Levant, to such an extent that the whole material culture changes. And this is one aspect of that change. So it's a little lamp that tells a huge story. It tells a story of adaptation to a crisis, in this case, a climate change. It tells about the dislocation of a population and the way that these people adapt to change circumstances and change lifestyle.
We know what brought about this climate crisis. What triggered it?
It is almost certainly to do with an oscillation in the Earth's orbit. Certainly at this point, it was not a man-made crisis in the way that we are actually interfering with our own climate today. But it had a profound effect in the southern Levant, because Canaan supplied those things which Egypt really, really wanted: wine, olive oil, honey, and from the shores of the Dead Sea, bitumen, which they used for medicinal purposes and, of course, waterproofing. So when this climate change kicked in, the whole economy of Canaan collapsed.
When you were there on the site during this excavation and finding this one object during one of your campaigns, what did you think? What did you chanced upon this object, you took it out of the ground, you looked at it. Did it tell you a story already, or did it take much longer to analyze its real meaning and what it actually told you?
Well, yes and no to that one, Hartwig. The type of lamp, this 4-spouted lamp, was well known. It's absolutely characteristic of this period of recession at the end of the 3rd millennium, which lasted for perhaps no more than 200 years. So it wasn't surprising to find that type of lamp. What was surprising was the results that came out of analyzing these lamps for residue analysis. Because when we actually analysed, and we did a good number of them, about 10, 15 of them, what they showed is that they were not burning the traditional fuel, olive oil. They were burning fish oil, of all things. Now, in the context of this period of recession, it makes perfect sense. Olive oil is in short supply, and very difficult. No olive groves, no olives. But the people were very, very clever, adapting to this situation, finding another fuel which they could use. Fish you could catch at that time in the River Jordan, and we're not far from the River Jordan. But there's a very neat story around this, because olive oil burns at 4 times the intensity of fish oil. So in other words, to get the same amount of light for your house, for your tomb, even whatever it is, you needed 4 wicks to be burning at the same time, hence 4 spouts. And if you look at my little lamp, you'll see that all 4 spouts actually have signs of burning on them. They were used in that way.
When you found that little vessel, Jonathan, Was that already clear to you that what had triggered this profound change was actually down to a climate change? Or did you have other explanations or theories about that change? It's a massive change.
That had always been in my thinking for some time. And one of the reasons that I chose this site to excavate was to get more material to analyze and study. Because you're quite right, there had been other explanations for this really quite profound change in the material culture. People had said, oh, well, there's so many changes, there have to have been new people coming in. And I had always been uncomfortable about this, seeing more continuity, if you like, rather than change. But I couldn't actually put my finger on it. But then with the excavations at Tubb, with my little lamps and the analyses, a lot of things started to come together and to fall into place. And so it became clear to me then that what we were talking about was a change in lifestyle which affected the material culture. And I could explain almost everything in those terms, even down to the burial customs. And so it all came together very nicely. And really the icing on the cake, if you like, was the analysis of this lamp and the others like it, giving me that result for fish oil, because that made sense. Otherwise, why on earth would you make a lamp with 4 spouts all of a sudden?
The thing that really blew my mind, apart from the fascination of that, the story this object encapsulates. It's a vessel of information, you might say.
Mm.
What really blew my mind was when you said it's the 200 years crisis. If we think of the crisis we are going through, and of course we all can't wait to get out of lockdown and go back to work and meet again and welcome our visitors and go back to our research and to planning exhibitions and giving lectures and having debates and inviting the public to events in the British Museum. If we had to face a crisis that is 200 years long, I think we'd feel and think quite differently.
I think it's in the nature of crises that some of them are really quite short and sharp. And come and attack you almost. I mean, and in ancient history, there are a number of those. I mean, the crisis of the conquest of the Babylonians and the capture of Judah in the 7th century. I mean, that was a crisis. But a modern one. I mean, we think of climate change today, and it happens, yes, very slowly. It creeps up on you, and so you don't suddenly say, "Oh gosh, yes, we've got a crisis today. We've got a climate change coming." It doesn't happen like that, and we're slow at learning that lesson. But it's more difficult to assess nowadays because there's so many mitigating factors, particularly with the sort of technology that we have to our hands. If you're in a position where a city, let's say, is noticeably warming up, what do? You put air conditioning on or you put a fan on. We have all these devices which were simply not available in the ancient Levant. And if conditions became unbearable there, you couldn't just reach for some device to mitigate. You had to move away.
So I think that covers a lot of ground, and I'm really grateful, Jonathan, that talked about this little object. I think it does not only tell a fascinating story about the past, but also about your research and the work you're doing at the British Museum. But it also makes us reflect, I think, on our present challenges. If you've enjoyed this film, please subscribe to our program. And if you like, donate to the British Museum at britishmuseum.org/donate. Thank you so very much.